Mr. Motley, welcome to the Leaders Who Care Conversation series.
Well, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
No, it's my pleasure. You're doing some great stuff, and I want to have a chance to talk about it and how it fits into the world and how you fit into the world a little bit too. But how about if we start with just give us a brief introduction about you, who you are. Maybe if you want to tell us something that no one else in the world knows and share it now, that's fine too. Don't go into the whole business.
Just get started. You got to warm me up first, Mark.
I thought we just did that with the jokes. Go ahead.
So Chris Motley, founder and CEO of a company called Mentor Spaces, which is a virtual mentorship platform designed to help companies better attract, hire, retain, and promote underrepresented professionals.
That's all you got to tell us about you? There's got to be more, aside from the...
I mean, what do you want to know? I mean, we could talk about millions of things. I'll let you guide it and we'll go from there.
Family, where are you from? Things like that.
Yeah, I grew up in the south side of Chicago and then went to school for high school at a boarding school in Rome, Georgia, of all places. That's a funny story. Went to college at Columbia. And then when I graduated, joined the trading desk at Goldman Sachs, then on to start businesses, which I've been, very fortunate to be able to do and have been enjoying it every step along the way.
Brothers, sisters, kids you know about, kids you don't?
Only child. And I'll tell you something that very few people know.
Okay.
My wife and I are expecting. And I just found out 3 days ago, we're going to have a girl in October. So there's some juicy stuff for you.
That's brilliant. You heard it here first, maybe.
That is true. A good thing we told the parents a few days ago. So
no, congratulations. That's awesome news.
Very, very excited for baby number one.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I got 3 boys and it's what it's all about. It's what it's all about. And you'll hear it a million times because I did. We understand it logically, but we don't really get it until later that it's going to go by fast. And, mine are in their 20s and it'll go by fast. So enjoy every moment and make some great memories, right? So that's fantastic.
Certainly the plan.
So now you have somebody to mentor. So I like Simon Sinek a lot. I like his why, but I ask it a little bit different. Tell me, Chris, why do you do what you do?
How do you ask it different? I think Simon asks it the same exact way.
Well, he took it from me then, I guess so.
It sort of goes back to a number of things, but as I mentioned, I grew up in the south side of Chicago, teenage mom, single mother. But through a lot of serendipity and good parenting, was able to navigate in a very sort of manual way to a pretty lucrative career. And in that experience, you get kind of frustrated when you don't see a lot of people in the rooms that you're in, especially when you know how impactful those rooms can be, not only from a professional perspective, but also personally. And so, more than just the fact that I love the work that I do, which is a huge point, is that I feel like I'm built to do it. I sincerely feel that it's a calling. And there are very few people, from my perspective, that have a lived experience and then building an organization to scale that lived experience to many others. And so in many ways, it's a competitive advantage because I've actually made the transitions that I'm trying to influence others to make, but doing so incorporating technology and scalability, et cetera.
No, that's great. Kudos to your mom for being your good mentor, basically, I guess. That's not easy, and that takes a lot of resilience. It's taken decades, basically, for corporate leaders, family office leaders, and whatnot, to realize that aligning somehow, some way with social impact is actually good for business, not to mention attracting great people. So with that said, taking account of your personal experiences that you talk about as well as your business, background with Goldman, and even expanding a company in Africa, which is really something. I'm super interested about that. When did you begin to differentiate yourself or see yourself as somebody, as a leader who cares about impact, about making that difference?
Yeah, well, first I will say I think a lot of people have always realized this stuff is important. I think that they didn't understand, or what's changed is how you sequence it. Historically, people get very successful and wealthy and what have you, and then it's like, oh, this is let's put on the give back hat, right?
Right.
And I think now the mindset has shifted among at least the leaders that I admire, that they go hand in hand. I mean, business should improve society, and when you have a flatter world where information flows freely, you actually expose yourself to a lot of risk if you don't have that vantage point into the social good. And for me, I think it's always been in my blood, but there's a practical component, no different than some of these folks earlier in their careers, which is make money, learn skills that you can leverage to increase your optionality, right? And that's what I did, quite honestly, in my first career out of college at Goldman Sachs. But then you get to a point where you have more agency, where you say, okay, well, I know I can make some money. I know I have some skills that are pretty marketable. So how might I craft my life in a way that I can be, quite honestly, a fierce competitor in industry? And to me, the answer is very simple. Just do something you care about, that creates value to other people, that you uniquely sort of adept at pursuing. And the earlier you ask yourself that question and get it answered, not only from yourself, but by others you surround yourself around that hopefully you respect and admire, you get out of the rat race really quickly. And then you start focusing on something that, you will spend the rest of your life doing. At least that's how I feel. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to advance the careers of underrepresented talent. It'll change in its flavors and the ways that I go about doing it with my team, but that's the true north for me, because of all the things that I've experienced thus far in life.
You just reminded me, especially with you having a baby girl. I remember somebody asked one point, this couple, they had two kids. Are you going to have another one? And the answer was, well, I don't know how we're going to split all the love around and everything. We have to split it up. It's going to be really hard. And obviously the answer was love expands. It doesn't just get a finite amount that you split among three kids. It actually gets bigger. And when you were describing that, it kind of made me think of that, because free, free and open, open it up, open up knowledge and everything. That's what you're talking about. How appropriate with you having the baby girl for me to think of that example. But it is right on. And do you find people are getting it?
I think people are getting it, and we were joking, before the interview, that sometimes people just need to be told what to do, right? Because there are a lot of well-intentioned people who literally just don't know what to do. And my view is that, okay, that's an opportunity. Step into the spot and inform people exactly what they have to do and why it's in their best interest, and they'll do it. If you are sort of, walking around issues that need to be clearly and concisely discussed, then you just make it very hard to do business with you, right? And the downside of that is that some people can take that as people don't care. When that's one conclusion, but another conclusion can be you just weren't that clear. So I spend a lot of time just trying to improve the clarity and concision in which I communicate the value we offer to our customers and our community members. Because if someone didn't choose to work with us, I can't have it be because I wasn't clear. So people do get it. And those that don't, I go through this investigative process to understand why and try to improve the clarity.
Well, there is an expression, we were doing expressions before, and it's funny things that I've used for a long time, and we love talking about, clear is kind. And if you're clear, that's the kindest thing you can do. If you're ambiguous, it's not kind at all for anybody, because it doesn't work out. So
I'm going to use that. That is a mental note. That's a good one. I appreciate that a lot. I'm going to use
the
that.
First three I've given you are free. After that, we start charging.
well, then I'll just go to another resource that's free again.
And that's the freemium model. I know, but all kidding aside, it's so true. And I think to your point before, even people will deselect themselves out of an environment also, which is also good for both sides, type of thing. And we, as you know, we at Fifth Element, we're consistently engaged with clients. Some of them are leaders who care. Some of them are leaders who care, but like you say, don't necessarily know how, and we'll show them how also. And they're, we're talking with them about opportunities and initiatives where there's a specific intent for furthering diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're in a collaboration about anti-racism right now. We're talking about, is it really best practices? Because if there's so many things that have to be changed, how can they be best practices? Maybe they should be trusted practices, or maybe just not, maybe they're not the best practices. So, we've also had experiences being mentored and being mentees and all that. Can you share with us now the differentiation of mentor spaces and what's the impact baked into the model that is being offered?
Yeah. So number one, and probably one of the most important things, is that it's designed for scale, right? Historically, mentorship is seen as very cumbersome, very time consuming, because people come to it with a set of assumptions that aren't necessarily true. And when we think about mentorship, it's about having a conversation with someone in the know. And so if we continue to build technology that facilitates conversations with people in the know at scale, you really can change the world, right? Because what we know, and this goes to the second point of, we're culturally relevant. And what I mean by that is that when we're focusing on underrepresented talent, you have to be very clear about what the pain point is, right? Every company wants to improve in, talent attraction and retention, employee belonging, and those types of things. But the methodologies that they've been using haven't worked, right? So everything they've been doing basically is wrong, right? To your point about best practices. So for us, we're culturally relevant, and so we understand what that pain point is. And in our case, it's a lack of confidence. If someone lacks confidence and you show them a job that you think they will be good for with no other context, you're only amplifying their anxiety, right? You won't solve your problem of people wanting to work at your organization. The second thing that we realize is that there's a lack of social capital. People from underrepresented communities don't know people who give them an advantage in some way by clean information transfer and whatnot. And mentorship, if done in a scalable way, groups are a big part of this, where people are learning together. You simultaneously help to build confidence. You help to build social capital, which from a product perspective is increased engagement. That provides a very clear pathway to our customers who have pipelines that they can pull from when they're trying to attract talent. And then the final piece is we're community driven, right? No one can do everything. And what we recognized early on is that there are organizations out there, whether it's historically Black colleges and universities, traditional universities, other minority serving institutions, or even nonprofit organizations that serve this community. They all have one thing in common. Technology is not their core competency. And chances are, if you involve technology into the solution, you can add tremendous value to these organizations. So rather than operating in a silo and trying to do all of this stuff ourselves, we took a look at the marketplace and said, well, these organizations have relationships with corporations. These organizations have already built a community in a very manual way. And we can build the technology that does a practice, facilitating mentorship, that no one would disagree with. And if you can do it the right way, well, then you're able to take advantage of the assets of other people and then give them the advantage of the asset you created. And so it sort of rationalizes the market in a way where you're taking advantage of everyone's competitive advantage, but you're doing it in a way where everyone benefits. And I think the way you all talk about it at Fifth Element is these omni-win sort of relationships. And we think about them the same way. I never heard that word until I met you and your team. So that's another one that I'll use as well. I could pay for that one if you want.
No, There's so many great things about what you're doing and what you said. Number one, in working in a lot of DE and on DEI stuff, and whether it's any minorities, if you put minorities just in leadership positions right now, and there's no one to succeed after, it's just going to be here we are again type of thing. And that's
Well, not only that, if you put minorities in positions of leadership without being aware that that might be the first leadership role that they've had, which means there's a certain type of support that's required, they won't be successful, right? So these are the just other examples of really understanding the context. And I don't know how much companies do this, but ask your employees, how can you be helpful to them? It's a very simple question, and you get the answer, and it becomes very, very clear really quickly on at least part of what the solution should be, and then engage people who have core competencies in bringing those solutions to bear.
not to mention, here's my sports analogy again. A player will do anything for a coach that cares about him. A sports player, whether it's hockey, football, or whatever, which is what you're describing there. If they see whoever they ask,
Yeah.
asking that, then they care about.
Yeah. And there's another perspective too that builds on what you just said. Great coaches adapt their system to the talent of their team. They don't just force people into a system, right? And I think that's the recognition that I think executive leaders and the people they lead, they have to understand that that's the agreement, so to speak, that both sides are meeting each other in the middle for mutual benefit. And I think that now, to your earlier point about an awakening, that a lot of these conversations, or at least people have a willingness to create the space for these conversations to happen. But as an entrepreneur, I'm like, okay, that's great. What are we going to do now? And let's get something going.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said of seeing someone that looks like you or a similar background to you or whatever in a position. It sounds so simple, but it just does give you like, wow, I can do this type of deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, you talked about my childhood. I mean, I grew up in the church. And one of the things that the minister always said is that, a kid can't be who he or she hasn't seen. And he's talking to the whole congregation. And I think that was his way of almost encouraging his congregation to have open conversations and open dialogue with younger people in the church, because you're right. The first step is just seeing that it's possible. And that does a very magical thing from my perspective, which is it's almost like the leading indicator for the next question, which oftentimes is, how did you get there? Right. Now that I know what there is, how did you do it? Right. And how might I sort of follow in that footstep?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I just wanted to add is I've seen companies that have had mentors, internal mentors, and even with good intent, they weren't necessarily trusted because one might have said something that they shouldn't, was supposed to be confidential in the conversation upstairs, or it gets to HR or whatever and becomes a problem. And when trust goes, it's pretty well gone in that thing. And I think with your model, your system, something like that seems to be, it would be totally prevented.
No, totally. But I think part of it comes down to, so first of all, it's the recognition that there's no such thing as mentor school, right? So there has to be training, not for both sides of the relationship. If you are the person learning or you're the person sort of teaching, there is a certain training that goes with that. And that's something that we specialize in. But the other part is a recognition that it's bi-directional. If the subject matter changes, the person who's playing the role of the mentor very quickly becomes the person being mentored. And that really speaks to the overarching vision for our organization, which is, we want to create this safe space where people who want to engage in the practice of mentorship, regardless of the role that they're playing at a specific point in time, they can do it on mentor spaces. And ultimately, again, we don't try to overcomplicate this. It's just a conversation. And how do you reduce the friction in having conversations? Now, when you add on COVID, when you add on the hyper sensitivity around race, it provides other opportunities to remove friction. And so it makes me excited because there's a lot of things we can do, and I'm looking forward to doing them.
Yeah, absolutely. You should be excited because it's a right time, right place, if you will, type of thing too. And people want to feel belonging. You know, it's the thing that fills their hearts and souls more than anything is belonging. And you know, you can be belonging to one person. That's a great mentor. You can belong to a whole bunch. And I think you're absolutely providing that. Um, you talked about awakening. Do you find that leaders are more awakened now because of all the stuff that's been going on, COVID, technology, you name it?
Well, you shared something with me earlier that, an executive you were speaking with uh, is feeling the most stress free that he's ever felt because he has a place to talk about and be vulnerable, right? Which is a really really good insight. And so I think that there has been an awakening of sorts because there are more intentional sort of spaces that are created for these conversations. And so I certainly see it. Now, it doesn't mean that it's easy, but I do think that, don't get me wrong, there are some real serious challenges. But on the other side, there is probably equal number of people at the very least, and I would think it's a majority of people who genuinely want to move their organization, move their families, move the country forward. And my personal view on these things, whether it's in a local community or more broadly, is that it's the best time for leaders to step up, right? Because I think the challenges that we've had, or the challenges that if anybody sort of dissects a problem, almost always it comes down to a lack of leadership, my personal opinion. And so when you have the challenges that have presented themselves, in 2020, even today, I think it's a great opportunity for people not to just say, I want to be a leader. I want to, no, okay. You have lots of opportunities to prove it, right? And step up and show up. And I think that now, to your earlier point, leaders have an opportunity to show up in a different way. And the power in that is what I mentioned earlier. A person can't be who they haven't seen. So when you're a person at an organization and you see your leader being vulnerable, well, then you model that behavior. Everybody started to model that behavior, which started to sort of catalyze positive conversations. Again, how might families change? How might organizations change? Communities? How might the country? How might the world change? Right? And that's what gets me jazzed. That's why I love doing this work.
And you will get some of that as a parent too, I might add. Um, you know,
I'm looking forward to that. I loved your point about love expanding. Like the thought of that is it really fills me with a lot of joy. So I'm looking forward to that.
no, you'll be filled with even way more than that. So you'll be able to enjoy it. So last thing I want to ask you in this part is, a lot of we work with a lot of senior level people, and in fact, the best time to have a great leader is when things aren't perfect. When they're perfect, it's pretty easy to some degree. That's when you fix things, when they're perfect. So not when you're desperate. So, but what role do you see business leaders who care, if you will, playing in ensuring that the well-being of their employees, their coming employees, and when I say well-being, I mean financial, physical, and mental well-being is
Mhm.
taken care of? What role do you see them playing in that?
I don't think their role is any different than their roles should have been up until this point, which is you have to provide an environment where people can show up and be their best selves, right? The leader of the organization is most incentivized to do that, right? I mean, I don't know what the latest stats are. You know this stuff way better than me, but it's always been interesting to me that the average tenure of a Fortune 500 CEO is like 18 months, right? And they have these huge pay packages and all these stock options and all sorts of things. And I could just imagine being tapped to lead an organization knowing that on average I'm going to last 18 months. And I think if you did a survey, or if you had a crystal ball and you can sort of look backwards and get all the data, I think my hypothesis is that those leaders were trying to figure out how to maximize their own sort of accomplishments in 18 months. Just assume that 18 months they're going to be gone, uh, versus thinking about, well, what has to be true for me to last longer than 18 months? And I don't know how many people take that perspective, but to me, just common sense is you create an environment where people show up as their best selves every single day. And I think if one does that, then the leader can work on the business versus in the business, and leverage their strengths to the fullest extent. What I find just objectively is that leaders quickly get mired into just all the muck in a business that prevents them from being proactive to create a space where people can be their best selves. And that, because they're just in this reactive cycle, and it just seems that 18 months is when the cycle's over, but, objectively. So again, it's just my perspective, but it I don't know who said it first, but it's often repeated. The simplest answer is often the right one, and create a safe environment where people, are able to perform.
And if you tell a coach that he has 1 year to succeed, then a year and a day doesn't matter. Just that year matters, and he or she makes all the decisions just then, which could mortgage the future. So it's the worst type
Yeah.
of scenario to be in. Last question, real brief. With all that's happened in 2020, now we're in 2021, which is zooming by the way. And what are you most grateful for?
Oh man, to be alive in this time. I mean, in taking it from a historical perspective, right? I mean, you have the pandemic in 1918, right? You have sort of, economic crisis in 1929 into the 30s. You have the civil rights movement, and everything that positive and negative that came with that in the late 60s, right? Um, and um, and then you had sort of wars, right? And and in my lifetime, and certainly just in the last few years, we've had generation defining experiences happening all at the same time. And in all of those moments that I just sort of brought up, those were explosive times for opportunities in almost every sector of the global economy. And so I think it's just a mindset thing more than anything else, which is this: we live in a world of abundance, and not a world of scarcity. The more that people realize that, I think the more successful we all will be. But what makes me most excited is just to be alive, and having, quite honestly, a shared experience with, like, global citizens, right, of the pandemic, of all of the things we've experienced. That sort of, I hope, will bring us together in a way, to help us come up with the next set of innovations that moves society forward. So that's my first answer. I'm sure there's lots of other things. I love my health, my wife, my family, all of those things, but more so than all of that, it's just to be alive during this time.
Yeah, that's a great way to conclude. Appreciate that. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great questions.